Myo Renge Kyo Nam Myo Renge Kyo Nam Myo Renge Kyo. Hello, friends. I'm pensive because this is a go show, again, as Nichiren is wont to do. He was an excellent debater in his time, and as you may know, the history of Buddhism is partly a great history of really competitive debates throughout the history of Buddhism by scholars demonstrating clear understanding of the teachings, of the scholarship of the teachings, and as transmitted teachings, knowledge of any sort, take for instance our modern scientific community. There are hardworking, diligent scientists all over the world looking at really the same problems or finding unique niches within a problem to identify either ideas that resonate or that kind of call to questions previously held, English. You might say beliefs, but they're not beliefs in that they're observations, discoveries, things revealed. And then somebody looks at them in a little different way or with new instrumentation or new knowledge and discovers, yeah, but it's more like this. And then those discoveries and those revelations spread throughout the scientific community, and there will be some that go, nah, hogwash, and some that say, oh, yeah, that's really important. And then there's a sort of compendium that comes around and says, okay, argue your point. Why do you see this happening? How do you prove it? And if the group or the individual scientist can say, well, this is why, look at this, look at the math, look at the way this works, and the experiments that I made to show that it actually works this way, that group or scientist will either succeed, and then the scientific community will have to recognize that, oh yes, this is valid, this is true, or they'll go, you see, it's just he went off on a tangent, or she went off on a tangent, and what she found was just unique to the way that she looked at it, and it's not a pervasive truth. Well, this methodology is very much the history of Buddhism. This is how Tendai took on the 7 northern schools and the many, I forget how many, southern schools, to bring them all under the auspices of, not under, but to recognize the primacy of the Lotus Sutra and to place it in its proper order within the scholarship of Buddhism. So, I say all of this because if you study Nichiren, you're going to be confronted with a scholar who is constantly in debate because of the time he lived in. In the 13th century Japan, their whole society and government and way of living was transitioning still from a kingdom-based fiefdom to a shogunate run by the samurai. And there was great compassion in that, as well as great violence in that, and a lot of authoritarian kind of thinking, and many sects not just Buddhism, but many others, but certainly Buddhism, which is Nichiren's concern, vied for supremacy. It was very political. And Nichiren comes along and says, screw the politics, screw PC, screw the favoritism and all of that. Let's get down to brass tacks and talk what Buddhism really is, the scholarship. And so, oftentimes when you read Gosho, when you read his writings, whether he's talking to a student, a fellow practitioner, or whether he's talking to the shogunate itself and saying, hey, this is why you're experiencing your problems, because you're not following the correct path for living life. Buddhism has an eightfold noble path, and it's really about how we live our lives. And if you don't live your life right, then you can't expect your life to go well. It's very, very basic, kind of this, then that, So Nichiren spends a lot of time not just displaying his scholarship, but putting his scholarship on view to reason arguments. Now, in this Gosho, the essence of the Medicine King chapter, the Medicine King chapter has been used throughout many centuries in different cultures to justify different actions. And we're not going to talk about all those today. I have some videos about Buddhist monks who do tremendous harm to themselves, justifying it with this medicine chapter. But interestingly enough, Nichiren's not going to spend much time on that. It's an aberration. What he is going to do is use the Medicine King chapter in its reference to scholarship within the Lotus Sutra and the greater, broader scholarship of all Buddhist sutra. So all of this is to prepare you for something that's going to be a fairly in-depth study that may spawn ideas to go and research other things, which is great. That's the nature of scholarship. They always brings up curiosities and points where you go, I need to go check that out. Do it. So I'm going to start reading this, and I'm going to try to limit my commentary, because this is a pretty involved Gosho, and I think you'll be either inspired or just want to, or curious at least, to go check out these other things. But certainly it will help open your eyes, your understanding of the way the Lotus Sutra was written and what it means, certainly according to Nichiren. So here we go. Concerning the general meaning of this chapter called the Medicine King, the Medicine King chapter is the 7th volume and is the 23rd of the 28 chapters that make up the Lotus Sutra. Now, obviously, he's using the Kumarajiva translation, one of them anyway, the one that's most commonly held as the 28th chapter. As you know, when I did my Lotus Sutra series, I also referred to the H. Kern 27th chapter Lotus Sutra that Kumarajiva also saw, as well as other scholars of his day. But it was a translation made in the late 1800s. So the point of view and the language, the inculcating of the cultural realities of that time were in the translation. And it's rather amazing that over 200 years, the translations still, even with different rhetorical vernacular of translation, say the same thing. Sometimes, for me at least, it's more helpful to read it in these different cultural realities, because certain aspects of the original really come through strongly when you compare the ways in which it's translated. So I'll continue here. The first volume of the sutra contains 2 chapters, the introduction chapter and the expedient means chapter. The introduction chapter serves as a prologue to the entire 28 chapters. Now, he's not talking about the Medicine King, right? We're talking now about the entire Lotus Sutra. The 8 chapters beginning with expedient means and continuing through prophecies are concerned primarily with clarifying how persons of the 2 vehicles can attain Buddhahood, and secondarily with clarifying how bodhisattvas and ordinary people can attain Buddhahood. Don't you find it interesting that bodhisattvas and ordinary people are grouped together? Because we are the Sangha. We are the bodhisattvas of the earth. Okay? The 2 vehicles are Sarvakas and voice hearers, or Pratyeka Buddhas, right? So they're the worlds of learning and realization, right? This was the highest form of attainment in Hinayana Buddhism, or early Buddhist sects, often called Arhat, or Arhant, different pronunciations, different vernaculars. But these are now, in the light of the Lotus Sutra and the later Mahayana teachings, ways of stubbornly adhering to the idea of an earthly self, and that Buddhahood, or the enlightened, awakened self, could only be realized after death. This is completely not Buddhism. Buddhism has from the start been a philosophy or a method to live life well. That Buddhahood is here and now. It is our environment, it is us, and all that remains is for us to awaken to that truth, to reveal it in our minds. So that is the bodhisattvas, and consequently, ordinary people, because only ordinary people can be bodhisattvas. So, the following 5 chapters, the Teacher of the Law, Treasure Tower, Devadatta, Encouraging Devotion and Peaceful Practices chapters, explain how the teachings set forth in the preceding 8 chapters are to be carried out by ordinary people in the latter age. So it is a manual of how to practice correctly Buddhism and Buddhist scholarship. The ensuing Emerging from the Earth chapter serves as an introduction to the Lifespan chapter. The subsequent 12 chapters, numbering from the Distinctions and Benefits chapter on, serve primarily to explain how the doctrines set forth in the Lifespan chapter are to be carried out by ordinary people in the latter age, and secondarily to explain how those set forth in the 8 chapters from Expedient Means on are to be carried out. So interesting to understand the Lotus Sutra from this perspective, right? The Medicine King chapter, therefore, is a chapter that explains how one ought to carry out the teachings both of the 8 chapters, beginning with Expedient Means, and of the Lifespan chapter. It's talking about the lifespan of the Tathagata, right? What Buddha is. This chapter, the Medicine King, contains 10 analogies, the first of which is the analogy of the great ocean. I will begin by explaining this analogy in outline form. In the southern continent of Jambudvipa, there are 2,500 rivers. In the western continent of Godaniya, there are 5,000 rivers. In all 4 continents, there are a total of 25,900 rivers. Some of these rivers are 40 ri in length, some are 100 ri, some only 1 ri, 1 cho, or 1 fathom. However, concerning the matter of depth, not one of these rivers can match the great ocean. Among all the sutras, such as the Flower Garland Sutra, the Agama Sutras, the Correct and Equal Sutras, the Wisdom, Profound Secrets, Amida, Nirvana, Mahavarachana, Diamond Crown, Susidikara, and Secret Solemnity Sutras, all the sutras preached by the Thus Come One Shakyamuni, all the sutras preached by the Thus Come One Mahavarachana, all the sutras preached by the Thus Come One Amida, all the sutras preached by the Thus Come One medicine master, and all the sutras preached by the various Buddhas of the three existences of past, present, and future, among all these sutras, the Lotus Sutra stands foremost. Thus, these other sutras are analogous to the large rivers, middle-sized rivers, and small rivers, while the Lotus Sutra is linked to the great ocean. The ocean now this is, he's not saying this of his own opinion, he's saying this is what the medicine chapter in the Lotus Sutra itself is teaching. The ocean possesses 10 virtues, in which it surpasses the rivers. First, the ocean gradually becomes deeper, which is not true of the rivers. Second, the ocean refuses to house corpses, which is not true of rivers. Third, the ocean obliterates the names of the various rivers that flow into it, while rivers retain their names. Fourth, the ocean's taste is the same everywhere, while this is not true of rivers. Fifth, the ocean contains various treasures that are not found in rivers. Sixth, the ocean is extremely deep, which is not true of rivers. Seventh, the ocean is boundless in breadth, which rivers are not. Eighth, the ocean houses creatures of great size, which is not true of rivers. And ninth, the ocean has tides that ebb and flow, but rivers do not. And 10th, the ocean absorbs the waters of torrential rains or huge rivers without ever overflowing. But this is not true of rivers. So, you can debate those as facts if you like, but obviously those are analogies to help understand the comparison of these other teachings to the teaching of the Lotus. The Lotus Sutra likewise has 10 virtues. This is all from the Medicine King chapter. While the other sutras have 10 faults. In the case of this sutra, the benefits gained from it increase in depth and bounty, and they continue down to the 50th person who hears of it. You've heard this story before, right? About the promulgation of the Lotus Sutra, to read, recite, share, distribute, right? And that even the 50th person on, if you tell someone and they tell someone and that person then in turn tells somebody else, all the way on down to the 50th person, if that 50th person, upon hearing this teaching or one sentence of this teaching and takes in it, sees in it, and commits to it the virtue of the teaching for their own life, they will get the bounty of this teaching just as much as the first person or even the sutra itself. So, in other words, the depth of this teaching is regardless of your state, financial state, caste, where you were born, how smart you are, whatever. This Lotus Sutra teaching is so profound that all sentient beings will benefit from it and can benefit from it. All they need to do is take it up. All right? Whereas other teachings may benefit the reader in some form, but by the time it gets watered down to the 50th person, it's meaningless and has no effect. So it's not as universal, is basically the point here. In the case of other sutras, however, there is no benefit to be gained even by the first person who hears them, much less the second, third, or fourth person, and so on down to the 50th. Basically what I just said. Though rivers may be deep, their depth cannot match even the shallow places of the ocean, and though the various other sutras may claim that because of a single character, a single phrase, or the 10 meditations, you'll have to look that up, they encompass evil people who have committed the 10 evil acts or the 5 cardinal sins, such benefits cannot match those gained by the 50th person who hears a single character or a single phrase of the Lotus Sutra and responds with joy. And this is the key always in Buddhism, is intent and attitude, right? So you can hear, there's analogies all over the place about this. The great jewel analogy of the person who has a jewel and doesn't see it as a jewel, just sees it as a rock, could carry that rock around their whole life and be in poverty, poverty of spirit in this case, but actual poverty, until they pass it on or they die, and somebody else goes through their things and finds this rock to see that it is a great jewel, and they in turn have a wonderful, profitable life. It's not just earthly, but spiritually, right? So you got to know what you got. And the Lotus Sutra, of course, in this analogy, is the great jewel. So, in the case of the Lotus Sutra, just as the ocean refuses to house corpses, those who slander the law by turning against the Lotus Sutra will be cast out by the sutra. Even though in other respects they may be people of extreme goodness, and how much more so will this be true in the case of evil persons who, in addition to their other evil acts, slander the law. Though one may speak slanderously of the other sutras, if one does not turn against the Lotus Sutra, one is certain to attain the Buddha way. But though one may put resolute mind and conviction in all other sutras, if one turns against the Lotus Sutra, one will invariably fall into the great citadel of the Avicii hell. You're going to have a rough life. I move now to the eighth virtue of the ocean, the fact that it can house creatures of great size. And we find that in the ocean there are huge fish, such as the makara, think whales and so forth. The place called the Hell of Incessant Suffering measures 80,000 yohanas in total length and breadth. But when a person falls into the hell of incessant suffering by committing the 5 cardinal sins, this person alone is sufficient to fill it up completely. Thus we know that the inhabitants of this hell, persons who have committed the 5 cardinal sins, are beings of very great size. Interesting. In the other sutras, which we have likened to small rivers or large rivers, no makara fish are to be found. However, in the great ocean that is the Lotus Sutra, they do exist. And in like manner, the other sutras do not in fact state that persons who commit the 5 cardinal sins are capable of attaining the Buddha way. Or even if the sutras do state this, in fact the true principle has yet to be revealed in them. So, therefore, the great teacher Tendai, Chi-Che or Chi-Yi, who had memorized all the sacred teachings of the Buddha's lifetime, says in his commentary on the Lotus Sutra, quote, "The other sutras only predict Buddhahood for bodhisattvas, but not for persons of the 2 vehicles. They only predict it for the good, but not for the evil. This sutra predicts Buddhahood for all," end quote. But I will not go into the details on this matter because this is another discussion. This is, in fact, one of the great points of the Lotus Sutra, is its universality. So we're touching on that theme again. Second is the analogy of mountains. And I'm going to leave the analogy of mountains for the next part of this sutra. Just contemplate this ocean analogy for a while. You might want to go read the Medicine King chapter to get it straight from the Lotus Sutra itself and compare your understanding to Nichiren's. I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to find as many authoritative or scholarly translations of the Lotus Sutra and compare them for yourself. The meaning will shine through, I promise you. In the meantime, thank you so much for participating in my enlightenment and letting me participate in yours. Thank you. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo.